of love for dads and families. And today we will be talking about the success journey with our very special guest, Dr. Stephen Greene. Let me bring him forward. He's a dad of two children, 26 and 28, and he's created a student entrepreneurial academy which provides young people with the knowledge, skills, and mentorship to develop and launch their own businesses. So here we go. Welcome, Dr. Stephen Greene. It's so nice to have you here. And what is it that truly defines success as a dad? Is it their career, their legacy, their relationship that they build at home, or something else?
Well, in my opinion, I think a balance is very important. And I think ultimately it's about relationships, whether it's your family, whether it's your children, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your business. I think being a good person, which I define as being honest, being fair, putting other people's needs at a high priority is really important. I think specifically being a father. Well, I had two boys, so don't ask me about raising girls. But I think specifically leading by example was very, very important to me because I not only wanted to be a father, I wanted to be a role model to a degree. So I always felt that maybe I tried a little harder. Maybe, when I knew my kids were involved, like I did a lot of coaching, baseball, soccer, the whole typical sports that kids play. And
Mhm.
I made a point not to be favorites to my kids or things like that because I thought it was important to show that you have to do the right thing. But I think ultimately, I would define success. My kids still talk to me about that, and they don't ask for
Yes,
money.
that
And we
one
got
is very important. If they're
got a
still
good answer.
talking
They
to
still
you.
talk to me, and they're not asking for money. So maybe that's a little sarcastic, but no, I think at some point you go from being like a provide, like you're changing diapers, so they're totally dependent on you, to being kind of a guide. You have to make dinner, you have to take them around. Then you become a chauffeur when
Mhm.
they have sports and they got parties and they have friends. Then ultimately, you become kind of almost a peer,
Yeah.
especially when they start to have children and things like that. So I think clearly you go through phases. I think looking back and looking forward, I think successful is feeling like I gave them the time that they needed and were deserving of. And I think that's the best that you can do, right? So
I
that's right.
love that. And I love how you say giving them the time they needed as
Yeah.
well. And it's not always easy to manage the career
No.
and the time they need. And sometimes they don't need much, but other times, whatever they're going through, they may need a lot more. My
Now
children are adult, and sometimes it's a 2-minute call on the phone, and sometimes it's an hour and a half, right?
that's
Because the need is different.
and look, that being a parent, you'll know this, Christine, and everybody else will. Sometimes your kids aren't the most communicative. Sometimes they trust their friends more than they trust their parents. They all go through phases. I had two children that happened to be very different personalities, different, just different priorities, different goals. One was kind of a little more introverted, one was very extroverted. So you couldn't be the same parent, so to speak, to this every child. Sometimes you had to do certain things with one that you wouldn't do with the other, and vice versa. And I think that's another thing. I think flexibility has to be in there somewhere. But I think ultimately, look, we're all balancing something of, trying to run a business or have a career or have a job, because you have to provide for your family. That's still a piece of it. But
Yes.
having enough time to give them the love and the intangible support that they need as well, I think is critically important. And frankly, and I don't want to take it beyond any statement of face value. I
Mhm.
think that's the most difficult part of it. People are pulled in so many directions,
Yeah.
and I don't know that they're always able to prioritize their family life as much as they might want to. So
Yes, it is. It is a challenge sometimes, and I can remember when I was working full time, my kids were little, and I was a teacher. And
Hmm.
during report card time, I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks.
I hear you. But
And
but
during
every
those times, though, what we had kind of done is they would kind of be the cooks or prepare things that would
mhm.
make it easier, and they'd be so excited to help me. And then after that, I'd take over for the rest of
Well,
the couple of months that
I will add this because I think it's worth noting. My
Mhm,
wife was an excellent parent, and it
mhm.
made it easier for me because we were sort of like this. Like there were things she was good at, there were things that she became the go-to person for, the things I were, the things we were able to both do, and then for the most part, kind of realized there were the things that we were both poor at. um, I'll give you an example.
Yes, please do.
I taught both my kids to drive.
Mhm.
Okay, my wife totally failed at that. She had no patience. I mean, any of you like like she's going like this, grabbing the side. Her foot's like clamping down to the ground, like she's jamming on the brake. They come back from driving around an empty parking lot, screaming at each other. Uh,
Ooh. Yeah, that was
whereas,
not a
yeah, no.
effective,
Whereas I
learning.
had a lot more patience. Sports. Boys. I tended to be that. But she was better, even though I'm in education. She was better doing homework and that kind of stuff with them because they kind of just like being around her for that. So I think listen, it's hard being a parent by yourself. Sometimes circumstances are what they are. We don't need to discuss that.
Yeah.
But it's much easier when you have a partner who is a good co-parent with you and you agree. Because the last thing you want is child comes to you and you say no to something, then they go to the other spouse and they say, oh, that's fine. So you have to coordinate, you have to be on the same page. So that's important too.
I love that tip because I don't think I've talked about that in my 115 episodes. So it's
Well,
something that
I mean,
is
listen,
re-
it
it
takes two to make a
important.
baby, but it doesn't always take two to raise a baby. but
Yes, but discover like using your top abilities or your whatever it is that you're really good at. So that
mhm,
I mean, I taught my daughter how to change her tires from
there you
summer
go.
tires to winter tires. We did it together. How to hop on the crowbar. Or it's not called the
Yeah, yeah,
crowbar.
yeah.
I don't know the words, but the wrench
That's
thing.
right. The
And if you
wheel
put
wrench,
your whole
sometimes they
weight
call
and
it.
you
Yeah.
jump on it, you can loosen the bolt and get it
No,
off.
that's,
So we had fun,
you
doing this
never know what's
together.
going to be a bonding experience, right?
Exactly. There's so many fun things that we have done together that were really cool. And there were things, obviously, that I wasn't as good at, but did my best. So um, I was going to say, do you have any other? Um, I was going to say something earlier when you talked about, we have two kids and they both have their personalities. My daughter, we could talk forever about a topic. While my son, it was only about planting a little seed and seeing if it would grow. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But if I started trying to have the same kind of conversation with him that I would try to have with my daughter, he was an absolute no. He would turn the other way. Mom, leave me alone.
How was school today? Fine.
Oh, yes, but what did you like more? Sometimes we learn to
Yeah,
question
yeah.
better
You
as
know, you got to
well.
give it, as they used to say in sales, it's an open-ended answer, right? You don't want to have
Yeah,
a question that's yes or no. They'd still
yeah,
find, yeah.
yeah,
Do you think you did well? All right, what was your favorite question on your math test?
yes,
One of
yeah.
them. kids are kids are clever that way too. They know how to beat you at your own game sometimes.
Oh, they're really good at it, and I have found, in the process was that especially, if they know that we have some judgment around the outcome. And that's a really huge challenge because those expectations, I mean, we want what's best for them. We have high expectations, some of us higher than others. And
Mhm.
and it puts a lot of pressure on the kids. And then they don't, I have found anyway, they close up a lot more. And if we're able to always self regulate when we're talking to them so that our expectations don't blow up, or when company's over and we're not saying these things, oh, my child's going to be the best one and they're going to be an astronaut or whatever it is, there's all types of parenting.
That's true.
Well, then we take that pressure
I,
off,
I,
right?
I, I found in my experience, and I
Yeah.
saw this with a lot of other parents more than myself,
Mhm.
was it's when the parents try to impose their
Yes.
priorities or their goals onto their kids. Like I see this a lot with sports.
Yes.
I have an education business, so I see a lot where maybe a parent says, you got to go play tennis, play tennis, play tennis. Just an example, because they want them to use tennis as a vehicle, maybe get a college scholarship or some
Yes.
such thing. And the kid's just not that into tennis, right?
Yeah.
Or golf, whatever, or any sport, basketball, it doesn't matter. Um, and sometimes the parents get overly, or you get situations where maybe the parents are both lawyers and they want the child to be a lawyer. Nothing good or bad. I'm just saying
Yes.
it isn't
Yeah.
always in alignment. That the children don't always want what the parents want for them. And I think
Exactly.
sometimes that's a little bit of having to let go. You just have to say at some point, look,
Mm.
okay, I can't, you're 18, whatever, you're 16, you're 23. I can't,
Yeah.
I can't make every decision for you anymore. At the same time, you never want to see them fail when you know they're going down the wrong road, and my kids fortunately were pretty good. I mean, they smashed up a few cars and
Mm.
stuff, but I didn't really have issues like substances, and they
Mhm.
fortunately stayed away from that crowd for the most part.
Mhm.
Growing up with that, certainly a temptation for them. So we didn't really have to deal with a lot of that sort of thing, and I know a lot of parents have, and that's very difficult. Um,
It
but
is. Can I say something very quickly? This is totally my opinion, but
mhm,
if you take away all the expectations that we can have towards our children, it will take away the desire for the drugs and the alcohol, because that's an escapism, or Netflix,
that may be.
addiction, or whatever the addiction is, whether it's TV, drugs, alcohol,
Hmm.
you know, I think it's an escape where you feel um, well, safe, or an ability to forget what's going on, to just
I, I
calm
think I
your
think
nervous system
I
down.
think there's an element of realistic communication where you can say to
Yeah.
kids, "Listen, we understand what's going on. I was
Mhm.
17 too at one point, or
Yes. Yes.
15, whatever,
Yes.
and I know what you're going to be exposed to, and I know what you're going to be have thrown at you in a temptation sense,
Mhm.
and you have to be smart.
Yes.
It's I'm not saying absolutely you can't do anything in your life. I mean, it'd be contradictory if I'm sitting there having a glass of wine at dinner or something. I tell my kid never drink, but
Yes.
I'm not. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just saying that I think sort of understanding that they're learning. Kids experiment. Kids try things. Kids are becoming adults. I mean, there's just stuff that they have to learn on their own. You can't shelter a kid till they're 45 years old.
Yeah.
So, eventually they go off to college and then they're going to do what they're going to do there anyway. And sometimes you're just better off not thinking about it, I guess. That's my wife's strategy anyway. But I would hope that in a success, you didn't ask, I didn't say this before, but I would hope in a successful parenting child relationship, both of them, the parents and children, feel comfortable communicating with each other when there are issues. And I know that's not always the case. Certainly wasn't always the case in my world. Probably isn't always the case in every dynamic. But I would hope, in the most part, it is maybe not 100%, but primarily. So look, as they say, they don't come with a manual. Everyone's a little different, and they change. Just when you think you got it figured out, they change. Probably so do we. So
Yeah.
it's part of
And
the
this brings me to, I always say our children are our best teachers,
yeah,
right? They're there to educate us on flexibility, educate us on.
yeah. No, that's true. I agree with you. Or I put it another way: if you're
Mm,
unwilling to be flexible and
mm,
you're unwilling to learn and to try to adapt and improve, I guess, you're going to have trouble because it's not always going to be static, right? You can't do the same thing from the time a child's 6 till they're 17. You got to be able to change with the life changes, and the things that are going on. So,
Yeah.
again, I don't want to sit here and say I was the world's greatest dad ever. I mean, I certainly made my share of mistakes for sure, but I think in the end I was smart enough to take a step back sometimes, and maybe or think before I said something that maybe later I would regret a little bit or something, because that can happen too when you get angry, or you just something happened, like when the kid smashed the car up. I wasn't happy about that, but at least he wasn't hurt. Nobody got hurt. It was just a car. So sometimes you gotta just look at the wide picture. So
I love that
anyway.
you say that it's important to look at the wide picture because sometimes we get, so focused on the perfection or there are expectations
Hmm.
and we forget about the whole wide angle. I mean, it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're not repeating them. And how do you help your child not repeating? And I think this brings us to our number two.
Oh yeah.
Why is clear communication critical?
Well, I think in a way we've already answered this
Yeah,
indirectly, at least.
yeah.
It's what are people hearing versus what are you saying, right?
Mhm.
And part of communication is not just what you say. And I'm saying this as a parent a little bit, but I'm also saying it as a teacher. I'm also saying it as a business owner who works with a lot of students, right? So it's important, I think, to check for understanding. It's a sales technique. Sometimes it gets taught that way, but to just say, hey, I don't know, I can't think of an example, of course, right now. Can you take out the trash?
Mhm.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And sometimes you got to say, hey, when are you going to do it? Like you need to sort of confirm that they've understood what you want. And then I think the other important thing is giving that same uh, respect, I guess is the right word, when somebody's wanting to communicate with you, right?
Yeah.
So, this is in the army. Being in a family is not an army where somebody's giving orders and everybody else is just following the orders. There's a give and take. So why is communication important? First of all, for the obvious reason that you want people to be on the same page. You want people to be agreeing with what's happening in that way. But I also think it's important because when done without a lot of friction, it
Mm,
creates a much more harmonious situation, because that's the first thing that happens. People start yelling at each other, voices get louder, screaming and yelling, and
yeah.
that just leads to worse, right? So that's not usually something that's habit stuff. That's behavioral stuff, and it builds over time. So it's important for many, many reasons. I think the most important ones are just to get a message across that's clear. That's sort of the base level. But just from a sense of understanding and somebody feeling like they're respected, and their opinions respected when it comes to that. So you don't agree on everything. Nobody does all the time. Adults don't, certainly, but they don't start screaming and yelling at everybody, at each other.
No.
So I think that's why that's the key. But the real thing there is not the word critical; it's the word clear,
Yeah.
right? If you're talking in double speak, what do you think your kids are going to hear,
Mm,
right? If
yeah.
you're not lucid in what you are trying to communicate, why
Mm.
would you expect them to have a clear understanding of what you want them to do or what you want their behavior to be? So,
And like you said earlier, just before we went on the air, is you want to be that role model.
hmm
And it's being a role model with the tasks at our hand. I used to like to say, okay, who's going to do this week, according to the schedules, the exams when they got to high school, so that we could obviously the week that I was doing report cards, I wasn't doing all these tasks, but on the other, maybe I'd take over on other times so that it would be easier to manage everything. But sometimes we need tips on how to keep the communication clear. Do you have some tips on that? How do you do that so it doesn't get into those old patterns?
yeah, and
So,
again, let me preface this by saying I've certainly made many mistakes in poor communication. But I
yes.
think one of the things that I would say is when it's something simple, it's not. This is not what I'm talking about. When you get something that's a little more dense or something emotional, sometimes just think a little bit before you say something, because
Mhm.
people say things on reflex and in anger
Yeah.
that don't always come out the way they want. and then that just creates another layer of conflict, I suppose.
Yes.
And I think the other thing is just consistency. Just when you have a relationship with anyone
Mhm.
where you've been able to communicate, it's so much easier doing moving forward. I mean, I hear so many stories where, a parent kid will say, like, "I don't talk to my mother. Like, we just don't get along,"
Yeah.
and that's not going to change overnight, right? And it didn't happen overnight. It probably was the end result of a series of whatever, of events or something. Um, so I'd say that. I would also say, again, it's an example thing, and you got to remember, the kid's first teacher is their parents.
Yeah.
So if you have a situation with your spouse or your co-parent or partner, or whatever, where you're always fighting, or it's like one person telling the other person being kind of timid about it. What do you expect the kids to learn?
Yeah.
They're going to model what they see. That's what anybody would do, right? So again, it kind of goes back to the co-parenting a little bit, and
Mhm.
and sometimes there's a lot of nonverbal communication, obviously, and kids are
Yes.
they're super sensitive to that.
Yes.
In the same way that like dogs and cats are, sometimes they can kind of just tell when you're upset. They can tell when you're angry. They can tell when you're happy. And the children pick up on that. It's like, you were a teacher. Kids
Yeah.
will do in a class essentially what they're asked to do as long as it's reasonable and fair, right? Not going to jump out of a window, but I'm saying, like, if you lead a class with structure and you lead a class with purposeful objectives, kids will do it because that's what people do. And running a family, I guess, if you want to call it that, operating a family is sort of the same thing. It,
Totally.
there's expectations, there's
Mhm.
rules, there's boundaries, but you know, the communication is not an isolated standalone thing. It's part of the larger package. So why is it important? Because I think it binds everything together.
Mm.
But getting to it involves other important things as well.
Totally, totally agree with you, Dr. Stephen. It's, I mean,
Beautiful.
it's a whole, it's like a web, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a let's use a big word. It's a multi-dimensional process,
Yes, totally.
right? Everything kind of affects everything. Yeah, so it's sort of like a web, and if one piece of it breaks down, it's going to have this ripple effect potentially through everything, but certainly through other things. And sometimes what happens, like, okay, I'll give you a little example of my family. My one kid was very sensitive about school. Like, he was a perfectionist. He always wanted to get A's, and
Mhm.
it's not always realistic. He had some challenging classes,
Yeah.
and he didn't like to talk about it.
Mhm.
And we would see his report card, of course, eventually. And my wife would say, "Well, you got a B plus and whatever. That's fine." She would try to say it in like this accepting way, but he didn't take it that way.
No.
Even though the comment was done with love and the comment was done with sincerity, it still wasn't received that way, right? What are you going to do? I mean, that's just part of it, right? So even if you do your best, sometimes it just doesn't always work out.
I
So,
totally agree, and I have a neighbor who when her son was 7, like, he's an engineer. He was a born engineer. Creating things, putting things together, what is like what feeds him, but such a perfectionist, and she isn't, and she didn't know quite how to deal with it. So I hired him to shovel my snow at 7, right? And I
wow,
said, "Oh, we need to have a contract and blah, blah, blah." So then of course, a 7-year-old is not gonna be here shoveling my driveway every time there's snow, you know? So
that's
I said, "Why don't we put a clause in the contract?" So I'm teaching him about contracts through the whole
mhm,
process. I said, "Why don't we put a clause that you come whenever you want, and when you want, I give you this amount of money?" And it was like, "Oh, wow." Well, he learned that he could negotiate contracts, right? And
mhm,
he didn't have to be a perfectionist in it. And mom was able to implement this strategy in
mm,
in their life, and a few years down the road, this child will not panic if his project isn't working out exactly the same way.
You never know with that stuff. You're right, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're Canadian, right?
Yes, I'm Canadian, so we
You
have
get
snow in
you get a lot more snow than we do down here. Yeah, that's a pretty big. The snow might be higher than the 7-year-old.
Yes, on some snowstorms, we
Yeah,
can get a
that'd be
meter, so
that'd be.
over 3 feet of snow on
Whoa,
those
whoa,
big
whoa, whoa! Yeah, yeah.
snowstorms.
We don't get that kind of snow. We get that kind of snow, and nobody leaves their house. We,
We
we just wait till it melts.
yeah, it's a bit different. But the point is, it's we really need to be creative when we're
Yes,
looking for solutions.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so I wanted you to be able to talk a little bit about this Student Entrepreneur Academy
So
because
not
you also wanted to talk about the power of the ebook. So I'm assuming it's interrelated.
yeah, a little bit. Let me tell you what I did about 10 years ago. I was hired by a like a high school college program
Okay.
to write a course to help students who wanted to learn about the entrepreneurial slash business world.
Hmm.
And it was kind of there's a thing called FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America, I think is what it is. It was sort of a conjunction of that and other things. And because they perceived me as an entrepreneur. Well, I mean, I was running my own business. I never thought of myself as like a Shark Tank entrepreneur, but whatever. So I created this course, and
Mhm.
we started doing it. And it was on Saturday, and it just rotated through 6 lessons. Then we'd take 2 weeks off. So basically, we did it 6 times a year. It got very popular, and
Mm.
it was really what it really was just interpersonal skills, communication skills,
Mm.
presentation skills,
Mhm.
resume writing, to a point of small scale business planning, being able to do a short, 30-second commercial, whatever one about your business, about yourself, doing a goal statement. And what I realized after about 3 cycles of it was I was having kids come to me and they're saying, this I learned a lot about this, but it also really helped me because I just had a job interview.
Yes.
And it wasn't like they were applying for president of Ford, but they had an interview for like to be a waiter in a restaurant, and they just felt more comfortable. And I was like, whoa, we need to expand this. So right now, what it is, it's called the Student Entrepreneur Academy. It's studententrepreneur.academy is the website, and it's 12 modules, and it's like a medium dive, not a deep dive, a medium dive into all things kind of business entrepreneur, but not that they have to run their own business because it will help in any interpersonal thing. Now I've been doing it long enough. I have kids who've gone through college, are now in the job world, who've come back and told me that they use the skills that they learned, which I find very rewarding. More recently, I've partnered with some networking groups where we're bringing these kids into networking meetings, and they're doing, short presentations, and they're being mentored by other business people. In some cases, they're getting jobs this way. They're starting early career decisions this way. So it's there for anybody who's interested. The youngest we have in it is 14, but I think probably 16 and older is maybe suited a little more for that. But we don't rule anybody out who's really enthusiastic. There's several instructors. I am one of them, but we tend to bring people in who are well versed and expertise in their field. Like, for example, the resume coach does resume writing for people for her job. That's her business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for example, but it's exciting. I enjoy it, and what it's you're as a former teacher or present teacher, it's the feeling you get. There's a feeling you get from helping people that
Mm.
you can't get any other way.
Yeah, no,
I don't know I don't know how to describe it or whatever characterize it, but when you see somebody who might be struggling a little bit or really wants to get ahead, and you give them the tools and you give them the path and you give them the direction, and then they do it, and you see the energy and the happiness it creates in them, it's extremely rewarding. And it's not a money thing. I mean, there can be money involved, but it's not a financial thing. It's it's a it's a stepping up of skill, and it's a realization of potential. So yeah, there it is, Student Entrepreneur Academy. Beautiful. And it's growing. So it's becoming, for me at least, kind of a legacy project. To
Mhm.
a degree, I look at all the kids that come through these things and all the kids I've taught in the past as kind of like sort of adjunct children of mine. Um, I could tell a million stories. I tell you a quick one because I know we're coming up on time.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, we're cooking, and my wife forgot something. So for the fourth time in 2 days, I run to the supermarket to get like one item, right? Then we needed to finish the stuffing. I said some herb that went in the stuffing. I don't remember. I'm standing in line, and there's a person behind me, and it looked really familiar, but I couldn't place him, right? And we're kind of looking at each other, and I got like two things. He's got like three things, and the person ahead of me had like a turkey, and they're taking a lot of time. Anyway, the point is, after like 30 seconds, kid says to me, "Aren't you Dr. Greene?" I said, "Yeah," because I'm so and so. You tutored me in biology when I was in ninth grade,
Cool.
and I tutored them in SATs as well. The kid is now. I said, "What are you doing now?" Oh, I'm a thoracic surgeon. Right? So he
Yeah.
graduated high school, graduated college, went
Yeah.
to med school, did an internship, did a residency, is now a attending thoracic surgeon at a pretty well known hospital in my area. This is like 26 years later, right? He's been at the hospital like 8 years already. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I guess I did a good job teaching you biology way back when. But you create, this is all part of the legacy, right? It's the same with anybody who does coaching. It's the same with anybody who works with other people. Is you see these people, and sometimes you don't even know what happens to them. You lose track and all. But like stories like that, to me, is what has made I wouldn't say my life worthwhile completely because there's other aspects, but certainly part of my career is knowing that you've touched a lot of people that way in a positive sense, and there's been a tangible result. So this is the goal in the mission. One of the mission statement goals of the academy, the Student Entrepreneur Academy, is to create. Our tagline is launching 10,000 entrepreneurs. That's our goal. It's lofty, but if you think how many kids are in high school, how many kids are in college, I think we can do it.
Oh,
And
for sure, for
yeah,
sure.
so if anybody's interested, we have cohorts launching all the time. You don't have to be super business minded. You just have to be willing to learn and be a little bit outgoing.
And I love how when we talked about the co-parenting and each person taking the lead in a part of where your child is going. And
Hmm.
if you have a child who's kind of independent and wants to know more about entrepreneurship, I mean, this is excellent, especially if you're not an entrepreneur.
No.
This will help them, and I believe that doing it younger and even redoing it later on when they're ready to start, or they can start a little entrepreneurship
Yeah.
project and then get to a bigger one.
But you should have seen some. You should see some of the projects these kids have done, and they don't
Oh,
have. It's not requisite to you have to have a business, but it's part of it if they want. I mean, you have to get kids really
mhm,
creative stuff, and some of them really have done very well financially. By
yeah,
well, I mean like six figures.
mhm,
It's really pretty amazing when you have the right tools and you have the right motivation, which you can say about anything.
exactly.
So this is it. The ebook we can say, leave for another time. It's one of the tools we teach within the academy. That's become sort of one of our signature things of how people kind of. It's like a portfolio. People put it. The graduation, as it were, from this for phase one is they have to do a presentation, and part of the presentation is they have to provide a product, like something they can give out to everybody there. And because it's a lot of it's done virtually, we do it virtually in an ebook. So the kids learn how to do it. They learn how to load it up with their information. They do videos. They do podcasting. It's really very fully full featured, I guess, if you want to call it that. But yeah, so there's a lot going on here. So it's like I'm parents to thousands of kids in a vicarious way, I suppose. Um, yeah.
I'm going to plant a seed because here in the province of Quebec, there's a big project to help kids, even in elementary school, um, do small entrepreneurial
Oh, here we go.
project, that they do with the teacher's help. Obviously, we have to go out of our way to support them in this project. But I had a student who was very shy and wouldn't talk, but she wanted to start an art project. She's in grade 5 for the grade 1s and 2 at lunchtime that did not like going outside, and she hated going outside. So one, she found something to do that could keep her in the classroom, with me during lunchtime, so she didn't have to go out as often. And when she started her project, quite a few kids joined, but at one point, she had so many kids joining that she had to get a team going. And when
Well,
she would talk to these kids, she learned to talk to them nice and loud. Like every time I'd be in the classroom supervising, so I could give her some little tips, and she flew with the project. And because we would stay with the kids for 2 years, grade 5 and 6, she got to continue on to grade 6, and she had a team of 4 other grade 6 students helping her with this project because she had 25 kids coming in lunch hour.
hey, that's the thing. Sometimes a
Yeah,
little idea becomes a life-changing thing. It's really interesting.
yeah, it
Yeah, and
is.
that's eternal. I've seen that so many times.
And that's why we need to go along with what our children want to discover, try out to see if it is for them or not for them. You
Mhm.
know, at 4, my daughter wanted to be a ballerina. She took the class, she didn't like it. So she finished her class, but then she moved on to something else. Now she's doing something totally different that has nothing to do with that. And it's okay, allowing them that space. So thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Greene. It was nice to have you, and wishing you all the best. And oh, I have a closing that I usually do. I'm a little bit off here today, but anyway. So the ripple effect of love for dads and families. Um, check out on YouTube the other episodes that we have so that you can. And in the blurb, you will find the information to connect with Dr. Greene and with myself. You can find him on LinkedIn, and you can also find him on some of the other platforms. And in the YouTube, I've written his information. So, wishing you all the best to you and your children, and for you to step forward to be the best dad that you can be, learning